In the moonlit forests of northern Maine, ancient darkness walks among the pines. For 3 centuries, Damien Blackthorne has wandered alone, a vampire whose heart died long before his mortal body. He feeds when necessary, exists without purpose, and remembers what it felt like to love only in dreams that torment his endless nights. Tonight, the scent of blood draws him through shadows to a clearing where a woman lies broken and bleeding, her leg twisted at an unnatural angle. As he approaches, expecting easy prey, she opens eyes that hold no fear, only desperate hope. "Heal my leg," she whispers, her voice barely audible above the wind through ancient trees. "And I'll heal your heart." Her words stop him cold. In 300 years of darkness, no mortal has ever offered him anything but terror or revulsion. But can a creature cursed to take life ever learn to give it back? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The woman's name is Eleanor Moreau, though Damien doesn't know this yet. 3 days ago, she was Dr. Elena Moreau, respected botanist from the University of Vermont, leading a research expedition to catalogue rare nocturnal plant species in Maine's most remote wilderness. Now she lies broken in a moonlit clearing, her right leg grotesquely angled, her hiking gear scattered like breadcrumbs, marking her desperate crawl for help. She had been tracking rumors of ghost orchids, flowers that supposedly bloomed only under specific lunar conditions in these ancient woods. Local folklore spoke of plants that glowed with their own light, of healing properties that modern science couldn't explain. Elena dismissed such tales as romantic nonsense, but her grandmother's journal contained pressed specimens that defied botanical classification. Specimens collected from these very forests decades ago. The fall came without warning. One moment she was photographing what appeared to be bioluminescent moss. The next, she was tumbling down a rocky embankment, her ankle catching between 2 stones with a sound like breaking kindling. For hours she called for help until her voice gave out. Then began the agonizing crawl toward what she hoped was the main trail. Damien crouches beside her now, his preternatural senses cataloguing every detail. Her pulse is weak but steady, her breathing shallow from pain and exhaustion. Most humans would reek of terror at his approach, but Elena's scent carries only determination and an odd serenity that puzzles him. Around her neck, a simple wooden cross catches the moonlight, but it doesn't burn his eyes as such things usually do. "You're not afraid," he observes, his voice carrying the faint accent of old France. Polished by centuries, but never quite erased, Elena's laugh is barely a whisper. "I've been lying here for 2 days, thinking I was going to die alone. You're either my salvation, or you're going to put me out of my misery. Either way, I'm grateful someone found me." Her pragmatism surprises him. Most mortals who encounter his kind babble prayers or pleas, their minds fracturing under the weight of supernatural revelation. Elena simply watches him with intelligent green eyes that seem to see past his inhuman beauty to something deeper. "What are you?" she asks, though her tone suggests she already suspects the answer. Damien's hand hovers over her injured leg, feeling the heat of her blood, the frantic pulse of life he could end with minimal effort. Instead, he finds himself studying the contents of her scattered backpack, field notebooks filled with precise botanical sketches, specimen containers, a digital camera with photos of plants he recognizes from decades of nocturnal wandering. "You study flowers that bloom in darkness," he says, deflecting her question. Among other things, Elena shifts slightly, trying to ease the pressure on her leg, and gasps at the fresh wave of pain. "My grandmother always said the most beautiful things grow in the shadows, away from ordinary light." I used to think she was being poetic. Something in her words resonates through Damien's chest, a vibration he hasn't felt in so long he'd forgotten its name. Recognition. Here is someone who understands that beauty and darkness aren't mutually exclusive, that some forms of life require different conditions to flourish. He touches her leg gently, feeling the multiple fractures, the torn ligaments. the internal bleeding that will kill her within hours without medical intervention. His fingers, pale as marble in the moonlight, could heal this damage, but the process would require sharing his blood, creating a connection between them that could change everything. "I can help you," he says quietly, "but not without cost." Elena's eyes never leave his face. "What kind of cost?" "The kind that changes you, forever." She's quiet for a long moment, studying his features with scientific curiosity rather than fear. The wooden cross at her throat seems to pulse with faint warmth, but it doesn't repel him as sacred objects should. If anything, he feels drawn to its simple faith, to the quiet strength it represents. "My grandmother used to say that some bargains are worth making," Elena whispers. "That sometimes you have to risk everything to save what matters most, and what matters most to you." Elena's hand moves instinctively to her jacket pocket, where her grandmother's journal rests against her heart. Finishing what she started, understanding the connection between healing and faith, between science and the stories we tell ourselves about what's possible. Damien feels something shift inside him, like ice beginning to crack after a long winter. This mortal woman, broken and bleeding, speaks of possibilities he abandoned centuries ago. Her offer echoes in his mind. Heal her leg, and she'll heal his heart. At the time, he dismissed it as pain-induced delirium. Now he wonders if she saw something in him that he'd forgotten existed. "Close your eyes," he tells her, making a decision that will reshape both their destinies. Damien lifts Elena with the effortless grace of his kind, cradling her against his chest as he navigates the forest paths only he can see. She drifts in and out of consciousness, her head resting against his shoulder, her breathing gradually steadying as his supernatural presence somehow eases her pain. The wooden cross at her throat glows faintly in the darkness, a phenomenon that should terrify him, but instead fills him with curious wonder. The monastery appears through the trees like a vision from another century. Built by French missionaries in the 1600s, it was abandoned during the Revolution and reclaimed by wilderness over the decades. Damien discovered it in 1847, drawn by its isolation and the irony of a creature damned by God, finding sanctuary in consecrated walls. He spent decades restoring it, not from religious devotion, but from a deep need for something permanent in his endless existence. Stone walls rise 3 stories into the star-filled sky, covered in ivy and night-blooming jasmine that releases its perfume into the cool air. Stained glass windows, miraculously intact, filter moonlight into jeweled patterns across the courtyard. What was once the chapel nave now houses Damien's extensive library, thousands of books collected across 3 centuries of wandering. But it's the garden that stops Elena's breath as consciousness returns. Even in her weakened state, she recognizes something extraordinary. Plants that shouldn't exist together, shouldn't thrive in Maine's climate, shouldn't be blooming simultaneously in defiance of natural seasons. Moonflowers spread their white petals like stars fallen to earth, while ghost orchids, the very flowers she'd been seeking, glow with soft bioluminescence among the shadows. "This is impossible," she whispers, her botanist's training warring with the evidence of her senses. Damien carries her through the main entrance, his footsteps echoing in the vaulted space. Candles flicker to life at his approach, revealing walls lined with books from floor to ceiling. Comfortable reading chairs arranged near fireplaces that haven't seen flame in decades, and specimen cases filled with pressed flowers, butterflies, and other natural curiosities. "Many things are impossible," he replies, settling her on a velvet settee near the largest collection of botanical texts she's ever seen. "I've had time to prove that impossibility is merely a failure of imagination." Eleanor's research journal lies open in her lap, where Damien placed it, and she watches in amazement as he moves through the space with absolute familiarity. He knows exactly where to find medical supplies, how to prepare herbal tinctures that shouldn't exist, which books contain the knowledge he needs. This isn't a recent hobby. This is the accumulated wisdom of lifetimes. "How long have you lived here?" she asks as he kneels beside her to examine her leg more closely. Time loses meaning after the 1st century, Damien says, his hands gentle but precise as he cuts away her torn hiking pants. I arrived during the Civil War. The monks had been gone 20 years by then, but their garden was still fighting to survive. Eleanor studies his profile in the candlelight, noting the aristocratic bone structure, the way shadows seem to cling to his features like old friends. Everything about him speaks of age beyond his apparent youth, of knowledge earned through experience rather than books. You saved their garden, we saved each other. His fingers trace the air above her injuries, and Elena feels warmth spreading through her damaged tissues. Plants are honest in ways people rarely are. They show you exactly what they need to flourish, and they reward genuine care with beauty. Elena opens her journal to a page filled with sketches of rare orchids, noting how several species match flowers she glimpsed in his garden. My grandmother collected specimens from these forests in the 1950s, plants that shouldn't have existed here, combinations that defied botanical classification. Damien's hands pause in their ministrations. Your grandmother was a botanist. Among other things, Elena turns the page to reveal a pressed flower unlike anything in modern taxonomies, its petals shimmering with an opalescent quality that seems to shift in the candlelight. She called this one moon-kissed healing heart, said it only bloomed for those who truly understood the connection between faith and science. The flower in Elena's journal is identical to ones growing in Damien's private greenhouse, cultivated from seeds he's protected for over a century. The coincidence feels less like chance and more like destiny, as if forces beyond their understanding have been guiding this meeting across decades of preparation. She was here, Damien realizes. Your grandmother walked these paths. Elena nods, watching his expression with growing understanding. She wrote about meeting a guardian in the forest, someone who protected the old knowledge when the world forgot how to believe in impossible things. I always thought she was being metaphorical. The silence stretches between them, filled with implications neither is ready to voice. Damien returns to treating her injuries, but his touch has changed, become reverent rather than merely clinical. Elena watches his face, seeing past the supernatural beauty to something achingly human, loneliness so profound it has shaped him like water-shaped stone. Elena wakes to the sound of bells that shouldn't be ringing. The monastery's bronze bell, silent for over 2 centuries, chimes softly in the pre-dawn darkness, its voice carrying across the valley like a prayer made audible. She sits up slowly, testing her leg, amazed to find the pain reduced to a dull ache rather than the screaming agony of yesterday. Damien stands at the tall windows facing east, his silhouette motionless against the lightening sky. Elena studies his profile, noting how he holds himself apart from the approaching dawn, as if even filtered sunlight through ancient glass might prove dangerous. I touched the bell rope, she says quietly. I didn't mean to. I was just exploring, and when my fingers brushed the cord, it rang. That bell hasn't sounded since 1847, Damien replies without turning. The day I first arrived here, it tolled 13 times and then fell silent. The priests used to say it would ring again when the monastery found its true purpose. Elena pulls herself upright, using a carved wooden staff Damien left beside her bed. Her injured leg supports her weight better than it should, though she suspects his ministrations involved more than conventional medicine. She moves carefully through the vast space, marveling at what she discovers. The library is extraordinary, but it's the details that reveal Damien's true nature. Books in 12 languages, some so old their pages crackle at the slightest disturbance. Marginalia in his distinctive handwriting dating back centuries. Observations about botanical specimens that shouldn't have been known until recent decades. Scientific journals from around the world. Subscriptions maintained across multiple forwarding addresses. Near the altar, where religious artifacts once stood, Elena finds something that stops her breath, a perfect recreation of a medieval monastery garden. complete with raised beds arranged in sacred geometry. Every plant serves multiple purposes, medicinal and spiritual, their placement following patterns that speak to deeper understanding of how living things connect and support each other. You've turned this into a living laboratory, she breathes. Damien finally turns from the window, and Elena sees something in his expression she didn't notice before. Pride. Not arrogance, but the quiet satisfaction of work well done, of purpose discovered through patient effort. Knowledge without application withers like unwatered seeds, he says. I've had 3 centuries to test theories, to observe what actually works, rather than what tradition claims should work. Elena touches one of the reading desks, noting how it's positioned to catch optimal candlelight, how reference books are arranged within easy reach. This isn't the lair of a monster. It's the workshop of a scholar who happens to be immortal. Show me, she says. For the next hour, Damien guides her through his domain, sharing knowledge accumulated across lifetimes of careful observation. He shows her how certain plant combinations amplify each other's healing properties, how lunar cycles affect not just growth, but the potency of active compounds, how some flowers respond to emotional states rather than mere physical care. Elena's botanical training provides the framework to understand what he's telling her, but her grandmother's journal provides the context. Every unusual specimen her grandmother pressed and preserved corresponds to something in Damien's collection. Every cryptic note about impossible combinations matches techniques he's perfected through centuries of experimentation. She knew about you, Elena realizes as they examine a particularly rare orchid variety. My grandmother understood what you were trying to preserve here. Marguerite was remarkable, Damien says, and Elena startles at hearing her grandmother's name spoken with such familiarity. She visited every summer for 7 years, documenting plants and techniques that were disappearing from human knowledge. She understood that some wisdom can't be preserved in books alone. Why did she stop coming? Damien's expression grows distant. She fell in love. Married your grandfather. Moved away to build a family. I told her that love was worth more than any botanical discovery, that some knowledge would wait while she created new life. Elena feels tears prick her eyes, understanding for the first time why her grandmother's journal contained so many references to the guardian, who taught me that growing things requires faith in futures we might not live to. See, a sound breaks the moment's reverence, a deep, resonant chime from the bell tower. Elena and Damien look up simultaneously, but this time neither of them touched anything. The bell rings 13 times, just as it had the day Damien arrived, then falls silent. What does that mean? Elena whispers. Damien stares at the ceiling as if he could see through stone to the bell itself. For 3 centuries, he's lived in isolation, protecting knowledge and tending beauty for an audience of one. Now this woman appears, carrying her grandmother's journal and somehow awakening things that have slept since before her birth. I think, he says slowly, it means the monastery has remembered its purpose. Elena finds the daguerreotype by accident, tucked between pages of a first-edition botanical text from 1789. The faded image shows a young man who could be Damien's twin, surrounded by a woman and 3 children in the formal dress of 18th-century France. Their faces carry the serious expressions photography demanded then, but Elena sees warmth in their eyes, love in the way they lean slightly toward each other. That's not you, she says, when Damien discovers her holding the photograph. It's not a question. No. Damien takes the daguerreotype with hands that tremble almost imperceptibly. That's who I was. Henri Dubois, second son of a wine merchant in Bordeaux. Father to those children, husband to Isabelle. His voice carries centuries of grief. They died in the plague outbreak of 1720, all of them, while I was away on business. Elena studies his face as he stares at the image, seeing how the mask of supernatural composure cracks to reveal raw human pain. You weren't there. I returned to find our house marked with the Red Cross, my family buried in a mass grave outside the city walls. Damien sets the photograph on the reading desk between them. For 3 days I knelt beside that unmarked earth, begging God to take me too. Instead, he sent something else. The story emerges in fragments, told by candlelight, as Ellen attends to her steadily healing leg. Damien describes the creature that found him in his grief, ancient beyond measure and tired of immortal solitude. The offer presented like a devil's bargain, eternal life in exchange for eternal service to darkness. I thought it was salvation, Damien says. A chance to find my family in whatever realm awaited, to apologize for failing them when they needed me most. But it wasn't. Death is a door that only opens one way. I became something that couldn't follow them, couldn't join them, couldn't even properly mourn them, because monsters don't have souls to grieve with. Elena reaches across the space between them, her fingers touching his with surprising steadiness. His skin is cool but not cold, firm but somehow fragile, as if centuries of accumulated sorrow have made him brittle. "You're not a monster," she says quietly. "I've killed. Elena, fed on innocence, taken lives to preserve my own existence. For the first 50 years, I was everything the stories warn about. What changed?" Damien looks toward the stained glass windows, where dawn light filters through jeweled patterns. "I found a child dying of fever in London, 1847. Her mother had been murdered by thieves, and she lay alone in an alley, calling for someone who would never come. I meant to feed, to end her suffering quickly." Elena waits, sensing the importance of this moment in his long existence. "Instead, I carried her to the Foundling Hospital. Used what little money I had to ensure she received care. She lived, Elena, grew up, married, had children of her own. I watched from shadows as she built a life I'd helped preserve instead of destroying. That's when you came here. I realized I could choose what kind of creature to be. The hunger would always be there, the need for blood to survive. But I could feed without killing, take only what was freely given or already lost. I could use my cursed existence to protect rather than destroy." Eleanor pulls her grandmother's journal onto her lap, turning to a page she's read countless times. In Marguerite's careful handwriting, the guardian carries such sadness as if he's lost everyone he ever loved. But his hands are gentle with growing things, patient in ways that speak to a soul worth saving. "She saw past what you'd become to who you still were inside," Elena observes. "Your grandmother understood that redemption isn't about erasing the past. It's about choosing better futures, one decision at a time." Damien traces the edge of the daguerreotype with one finger. "I kept this to remember what I lost, to fuel the guilt that kept me isolated. But guilt isn't penance, Elena. It's just another form of selfishness." Elena studies the photograph again, seeing not just Damien's mortal family, but the love that shaped him, the capacity for devotion that survived transformation into something society would call damned. "They wouldn't want you to suffer forever," she says. "If they loved you as much as this picture suggests, they'd want you to find peace, maybe even happiness again." Damien looks at her with an expression so vulnerable it breaks her heart. "I'd forgotten what happiness felt like until you asked me to heal your leg." The confession hangs between them like a bridge neither is quite ready to cross. Elena realizes her leg no longer hurts at all, that whatever Damien did has healed not just the breaks, but years of old aches she'd learned to ignore. Her body feels renewed, more alive than it has in years. Elena's healing abilities reveal themselves gradually, like flowers opening to morning light. It begins with her touch easing Damien's restlessness as he struggles with hunger. He's fought for decades. When his hands shake from denying his vampire nature, her fingers on his wrist bring stillness. When memories of his mortal family torment his sleep, her presence nearby grants him peace. The crystals appear when she empties her backpack to inventory her research materials. 7 stones in different colors, each no larger than her thumb, wrapped in soft cloth that smells of lavender and sage. Elena handles them absently as she works, not noticing how they begin to glow with faint inner light whenever Damien draws near. "Your grandmother gave you those," he observes, settling beside her on the library floor where she's spread botanical charts and specimen containers. "How did you know?" "Marguerite carried similar stones. She said they'd been in her family for generations, that they helped her sense what plants needed to thrive." Damien picks up a piece of clear quartz, and Elena gasps at how it flares with sudden brilliance. "She never told me they responded to supernatural presence." Eleanor takes the crystal from his hands, watching as the light dims, but doesn't disappear entirely. "My grandmother taught me to use them for meditation, for focusing healing energy. I always thought it was just New Age wishful thinking. Show me." Elena arranges the crystals in a pattern she learned as a child, placing them around Damien like points of a star. As each stone finds its position, the glow intensifies, casting rainbow patterns across the monastery's ancient stones. Damien sits motionless in the center, his expression shifting from skepticism to wonder as warmth spreads through his chest. "I can feel it," he whispers. "Like sunlight, but not burning." Eleanor places her hands on his shoulders, feeling the tension that's lived in his muscles for centuries begin to release. Whatever force flows through the crystals seems to recognize something in Damien that isn't purely monstrous, something worth healing rather than destroying. "My grandmother lost my parents in a car accident when I was 12, Eleanor says, her voice soft with memory. "I was in the back seat, thrown clear when we rolled, but they died on impact. The guilt nearly destroyed me. I kept thinking if I'd done something different, said something to distract Dad from the argument they were having, they'd still be alive." Damien's eyes meet hers, understanding passing between them without words. "Grandmother found me 3 days after the funeral, sitting in their garden trying to make the flowers they'd planted bloom out of season. She gave me these crystals and taught me that healing isn't about changing the past. It's about accepting what was, honoring what's lost, and choosing to nurture new life despite the pain." Elena's hands move to frame Damien's face, and he doesn't pull away, despite every instinct screaming that he doesn't deserve such tenderness. The crystals pulse brighter, responding to the connection between them. "You've spent 3 centuries punishing yourself for surviving when your family didn't," she continues. "But survival isn't a crime, Damien. What you've built here, the knowledge you've preserved, the beauty you've created, it's all proof that your existence has meaning beyond the circumstances of your transformation." Damien closes his eyes, leaning into her touch like a man who's forgotten what comfort feels like. The supernatural cold that typically emanates from his skin gives way to something approaching human warmth. "I dream about them," he admits. "Isabel, the children, they're always just out of reach, calling for me to follow. I wake up every sunset expecting to find myself in whatever hell creatures like me deserve. What if this isn't hell?" Elena asks. "What if this is your chance to honor their memory by protecting life instead of destroying it? What if every flower you've saved, every piece of knowledge you've preserved, is your love for them made manifest in the world?" The crystals suddenly flare so bright they have to shield their eyes. When the light fades, Elena realizes she can feel Damien's emotions as clearly as her own. Centuries of loneliness giving way to something that might, eventually, become hope. "The stones recognize you," she breathes. "They're responding to your capacity for good, not your supernatural nature." Damien opens his eyes, and Elena sees tears that shouldn't be possible for the undead. "How can you see past what I am?" "Because I'm looking at who you choose to be." Elena traces the line of his jaw with infinite gentleness. "My grandmother wrote about you, about the guardian, who taught her that the most profound healings happen in darkness when no one's watching, when there's no reward except the knowledge that something broken has been made whole again. The hunger comes at midnight like clockwork, a gnawing emptiness that no amount of willpower can suppress indefinitely." Elena wakes to find Damien standing rigid at the far end of the monastery, his hands clenched into fists as he fights the supernatural need that defines his existence. "How long since you last fed?" she asks, approaching him carefully. "6 weeks, he admits through gritted teeth. "I usually hunt deer, take what I need without killing. But lately, even that feels like betrayal of what we're building here." Elena studies his profile in the candlelight, noting the sharp angles that speak to barely controlled hunger. The way shadows seem to cling to him more possessively when he's weakened by denial. "There's another way," she says quietly. Damien turns to her, his eyes reflecting light like a predator's. "Elena, you don't understand what you're suggesting." "I understand perfectly." Elena moves to the altar where Damien keeps the monastery's remaining religious artifacts, lifting a silver chalice that hasn't been used for communion in over 2 centuries. "My grandmother's journal mentions blood-sharing rituals, consensual exchanges that strengthen rather than harm." Those are myths, romanticized nonsense, are they? Elena sets the chalice on the reading table between them, its polished surface reflecting their faces like a mirror. "You've spent 3 centuries assuming you're damned, that every aspect of your nature leads to destruction. What if you're wrong?" Damien stares at the chalice as if it might burst into flames. "Sacred objects burn vampires. That cup should be agony for me to look at, let alone touch." Elena lifts the chalice, holding it out to him. "Then touch it. Test what you think you know against what might actually be true." For a long moment, Damien doesn't move. 3 centuries of conditioning wars against the evidence of his senses, against the growing certainty that Elena's presence is changing fundamental aspects of his cursed existence. Finally, he reaches out, his fingers brushing the silver rim. Instead of burning, the metal warms under his touch, growing bright with the same inner light Elena's crystals emit in his presence. "It's responding to your intention," Elena breathes. "Not your nature, but your purpose." "I don't understand." Elena takes his hands in hers, guiding them to cradle the chalice between them. "What if vampirism isn't a curse, but a transformation? What if it's meant to test whether someone will use power to destroy or to preserve?" The idea is revolutionary, challenging everything Damien believes about his own damnation. He looks at Elena with desperate hope, warring against centuries of self-loathing. "If I take your blood, it creates a connection between us. You'll see my memories, feel my emotions, experience 3 centuries of accumulated darkness. It could break your mind, Elena. It could change you in ways neither of us understand. And if you don't, you'll eventually lose control and potentially hurt someone who can't consent." Elena's voice carries the steady certainty of scientific reasoning. "I'm offering myself freely, with full knowledge of the risks, because I believe the connection goes both ways. If I see your darkness, you'll see my light." Elena uses a small knife from her botanical kit to make a precise cut across her palm, letting blood flow into the chalice. The silver immediately begins to sing, a high, pure note that fills the monastery with resonance. Elena, wait, but she's already raised the chalice to her lips, taking a small sip before offering it to Damien. "Your turn." Damien accepts the chalice with trembling hands, staring at the mixture of blood and blessing contained within. Everything about this moment defies what he knows about his nature, challenges the fundamental assumptions that have shaped 3 centuries of existence. He drinks, and the world explodes into connection. Elena's memories flood through him, childhood summers in her grandmother's garden, learning to identify healing plants by touch and scent, the devastation of losing her parents, followed by years of dedicated study to understand how trauma shapes but doesn't have to define us. Her decision to pursue botany as a way of honoring both scientific truth and inherited wisdom. But Elena experiences Damien's memories too, the loving husband and father he was before transformation. Decades of learning to control his hunger through sheer force of will. the patient cultivation of knowledge and beauty as acts of defiance against his supposed damnation. When the visions fade, they're kneeling together on the monastery floor, hands clasped around the still glowing chalice. "You're not a monster," Elena whispers, tears streaming down her face. "You're a guardian. You've always been a guardian." Damien feels something shift in his chest, like ice breaking up after a long winter. For the first time in 3 centuries, he doesn't feel alone. Elena begins her garden at dawn, when the last of the night-blooming cereus is closing its magnificent petals. She's found a packet of moonflower seeds in her grandmother's effects, varieties that shouldn't exist according to any botanical reference. But she plants them anyway in the monastery's eastern courtyard, where they'll catch the first morning light. Damien watches from the shadows of the cloister, still too vulnerable to direct sunlight, but drawn by her purposeful movements. Elena works with the unconscious grace of someone who's spent a lifetime coaxing life from soil. Her hands sure and gentle as she prepares the ground. Moonflowers bloom at night. He observes, "These are different." Elena holds up a seed that seems to shimmer with its own inner light. According to grandmother's notes, they're hybrids she developed here decades ago. They bloom continuously, day and night, as long as they're planted with proper intention. She creates a spiral pattern in the freshly turned earth, placing each seed with deliberate care while speaking quietly to herself in what Damien recognizes as a mixture of botanical Latin and what might be prayers. The morning sun catches the silver threads in her dark hair, making her look like some ancient priestess performing a ritual older than memory. "What intention?" Damien asks. Elena looks up at him with eyes that hold new depths since their blood-sharing ritual. The connection between them has strengthened overnight, allowing her to sense his presence even when he moves with vampire stealth. "Hope," she says simply. "The intention that beauty can exist in darkness, that healing can happen between broken things, that love can grow in impossible conditions." Each seed she plants carries a whispered wish, for Damien to find peace with his dual nature, for herself to understand the healing gifts her grandmother tried to teach her, for them to discover whether what's growing between them can survive in the real world. As the days pass, Elena's garden becomes a living meditation on possibility. She transplants night-blooming jasmine to climb the chapel walls, its fragrance mixing with the monastery's ancient stones to create something that speaks to both wild beauty and sacred purpose. Ghost orchids, the flowers that originally brought her to these woods, find new homes in carefully prepared alcoves where filtered sunlight mimics their natural forest habitat. But it's the memory garden that moves Damien most deeply. Elena plants forget-me-nots in the shape of a cross, surrounded by rosemary for remembrance and lavender for peace. At the center, she places a cutting from his oldest rose bush, the one he planted the year he first arrived at the monastery. "For your family," she explains when he finds her kneeling beside the new planting, "not to replace them or forget them, but to honor what they gave you that survives even transformation." Damien kneels beside her in soil that smells of rain and possibilities. "I never thought I deserved to remember them with anything but guilt." Guilt isn't love, Damien. It's fear dressed up as devotion. Elena's hands work compost into the earth around the rose cutting, encouraging new growth. Love celebrates what was beautiful, honors what was lost, and believes in what might still be possible. The garden grows with supernatural speed, as if responding to the intentions behind its creation rather than normal botanical rhythms. The moonflowers are first to emerge, their vines reaching toward both sun and stars with equal enthusiasm. By the end of the week, they're blooming in impossible profusion, white petals that glow with soft luminescence even in daylight. Elena creates pathways between the plantings using stones gathered from the monastery ruins, each one placed to create sightlines that reveal new combinations as visitors move through the space. She builds a meditation circle around an old well, planting it with herbs that release their fragrances when brushed by passing feet. Time for courage. Mint for renewal, sage for wisdom earned through suffering. You're creating something that never existed before. Damien realizes as they work together one evening, his vampire strength making quick work of the heavier construction, while Elena provides artistic direction. I'm creating something that always existed in potential, Elena corrects. This garden, this place, this connection between us, it was all waiting to be discovered. We just had to be ready to see it. That night, as they sit surrounded by flowers that bloom in defiance of natural law, Damien understands that Elena has kept her part of their original bargain. She's healing his heart not by erasing the past, but by teaching him that love doesn't end with death. It transforms into new forms of beauty that can nurture future growth. The garden has become their shared language, a way of speaking truths too deep for words. Marcus Kane arrives in Millbrook on a Tuesday morning, when the summer heat makes even the shadows feel oppressive. He drives a nondescript sedan with tinted windows and license plates that change every few hundred miles, the kind of vehicle that becomes invisible in any parking lot. His motel room overlooks the main street, giving him clear sightlines to the diner where locals gather to share gossip and the general store where Elena Moreau was last seen buying supplies 3 weeks ago. Kane has been hunting vampires for 27 years, ever since one killed his sister in Pittsburgh. He's learned to read the signs: unexplained disappearances, animals found drained of blood, old churches and monasteries that locals avoid without quite knowing why. Elena's vanishing fits the pattern perfectly. Her abandoned rental car found at a trailhead leading into the deepest wilderness Maine has to offer. The silver blade rests in a custom sheath against his ribs, consecrated by priests from 3 different denominations and blessed with holy water from Lourdes. It's killed 17 vampires across 2 decades of patient hunting, each death recorded in a leather journal he keeps locked in a safe deposit box in Boston. But this case feels different. The local search and rescue teams found no trace of Elena despite days of looking. No blood trail or torn clothing to suggest animal attack or accidental death. She simply vanished as if the forest swallowed her whole, which in Kane's experience means supernatural intervention. He interviews the desk clerk at Elena's motel, learning about her research into rare botanical specimens and her particular interest in plants that bloomed at night. The conversation with her department head at the University of Vermont yields more useful information. Elena was following up on research begun by her grandmother in the 1950s, tracking down specimens that existed in family records but had never been officially catalogued. Dr. Moreau was convinced there were undocumented species in the Maine wilderness. Professor Walsh explains over the phone. She had some kind of family journal with pressed flowers that didn't match anything in our taxonomic databases. Brilliant woman, but perhaps a bit too willing to believe in botanical impossibilities. Kane has learned to pay attention to impossibilities. They usually point towards supernatural activity. He spends 3 days hiking the trails Elena explored, using GPS coordinates from her research notes to retrace her path. The locals warn him about getting lost in the deep woods, about old ruins where hikers sometimes report strange lights and unexplained sounds. They mention the abandoned monastery, with the mixture of reverence and unease that always accompanies places where the supernatural has touched the natural world. The trail goes cold at the ravine where Elena's hiking gear was scattered, but Kane's trained eye notices details the search teams missed. The undergrowth shows signs of something moving through it with inhuman speed and strength, branches broken too high for any normal animal. Most telling are the drops of blood on a fallen log, too. Much to be from simple injury, but not enough to indicate fatal wound. Someone or something carried Elena away from this place. Kane returns to his motel room and spreads topographic maps across the table, marking every abandoned building, every cave system, every place within a 20-mile radius where a vampire might establish a lair. The monastery appears on maps dating back to colonial times, marked as ruins since the 1850s, but never officially explored by any historical society. He loads his hunting kit with practiced efficiency, silver ammunition for his pistol, wooden stakes carved from oak trees grown in consecrated ground, holy water in unbreakable plastic vials, and a GPS tracker that will lead rescue teams to his body if something goes wrong. The blade goes into its accustomed place against his ribs, a familiar weight that's brought him comfort through decades of dangerous nights. Cain has faced 17 vampires and killed them all, but he's never encountered one that kept victims alive for extended periods. Most feed immediately, draining their prey and discarding the bodies like empty containers. The fact that Elena might still be alive after 3 weeks suggests either a very young vampire still learning to hunt, or something far more dangerous, an ancient creature with complex motivations that go beyond simple hunger. As sunset approaches, Cain checks his equipment one final time and begins the drive toward the monastery. His dashboard cross catches the dying light, a reminder that he's not just hunting a monster, but fighting a war between darkness and light that's raged since the beginning of recorded history. Tonight, that war comes to Millbrook, Maine, and Marcus Cain intends to be on the winning side, even if it costs him his life. The attack comes during the darkest hour before dawn, when Elena and Damien are tending the night-blooming section of their garden. The moonflowers are in full glory, their luminescent petals creating pools of soft light across the monastery courtyard. When Elena suddenly stiffens, "Someone's here," she whispers, her newfound supernatural sensitivity alerting her to the presence of hostile intent. Multiple people moving through the forest with weapons. Damien's head snaps up, his vampire senses confirming what Elena's intuition detected. He counts heartbeats, 4 humans approaching from different directions, their movements coordinated and purposeful. The scent of silver and consecrated steel reaches him on the night breeze. "Hunters," he breathes, the word carrying 3 centuries of accumulated fear. Elena's first instinct is to run, but one look at Damien's face tells her that flight isn't an option. This monastery is his sanctuary, his life's work, the place where he's built something beautiful from the ashes of his damnation. He won't abandon it without a fight. "What do we do?" she asks. "We survive." Damien's voice carries grim determination. "Stay close to me, Elena. Whatever happens, don't leave the monastery grounds." The consecrated earth offers some protection. Marcus Cain emerges from the tree line like vengeance personified, his silver blade catching moonlight as he advances across the courtyard. His 3 companions spread out to flank the monastery's exits, their movements professional and deadly. "Dr. Elena Moreau," Cain calls out, his voice carrying across the garden with calm authority. "My name is Marcus Cain. I'm here to rescue you from the creature that's been holding you captive." Elena steps forward before Damien can stop her, placing herself between the hunter and the man she's come to love. "I'm not being held captive," she says clearly. "I'm here by choice." Cain pauses, studying her face in the garden's ethereal light. She looks healthy, unharmed, her eyes clear and focused rather than glazed with vampire enthrallment. "This isn't what he expected to find. The creature has influenced your mind," Cain explains patiently. "Vampires are masters of psychological manipulation. What you think is choice is actually supernatural. Coercion." "You're wrong," Eleanor's voice carries. "The steel her grandmother showed when defending unpopular botanical theories against academic skepticism. Damien saved my life. He's been nothing but gentle and protective." Cain's laugh holds no humor. "Damien, is it? The monster has given you a name to make itself seem more human. Tell me, Dr. Moreau, have you seen it feed? Do you know how many people it's killed to sustain its unnatural existence?" The questions hit their mark. Elena hasn't witnessed Damien feeding, has only his word that he takes blood without killing. For a moment, doubt flickers across her features. Damien sees her uncertainty and feels something die in his chest. 3 weeks of growing connection, of shared hopes and whispered dreams, crumble under the weight of Cain's accusations. "Elena," he says quietly, "I've never lied to you about what I am, But you haven't told her the whole truth, have you? Cain presses his advantage. Haven't explained that vampire feeding creates addiction in the victim, that the pleasure masks the horror of what's actually happening. Elena remembers the blood-sharing ritual, the overwhelming sense of connection and peace it brought. Was that supernatural manipulation rather than genuine emotion? Has she been deceiving herself about the nature of their bond? Cain raises his silver blade, its consecrated steel gleaming with deadly purpose. Step away from the creature, Doctor. Let me finish this so you can return to your normal life. No! Elena's refusal surprises them all, including herself. I don't care what you think I should feel or what scientific rationality demands. I know what I've experienced here, what Damien and I have built together. She turns to face Damien, seeing past his inhuman beauty to the man who spent 3 centuries learning to choose love over hunger, creation over destruction. I trust you, she tells him simply, not because of supernatural influence, but because I've seen your heart. I've shared your memories, felt your grief for the family you lost, witnessed your dedication to preserving knowledge and beauty. Cain realizes negotiation has failed. He signals his companions, who emerge from cover with crossbows loaded with silver bolts. Then you'll die with the monster you're protecting. The battle erupts with sudden violence as Cain's hunters unleash their coordinated attack. Silver-tipped crossbow bolts whistle through the air, forcing Damien to move with inhuman speed to avoid being pinned to the monastery walls. Elena dives behind the stone altar as bullets shatter ancient stained glass, raining colored fragments across the courtyard like deadly confetti. Damien's supernatural abilities emerge fully for the first time since Elena's arrival. He moves like smoke given form, appearing behind one hunter to disarm him with bone-crushing efficiency before vanishing into shadows that seem to welcome his presence. But the hunters are experienced, their weapons blessed and their tactics designed specifically for vampire elimination. Cain pursues Damien through the monastery's corridors with relentless determination, his silver blade carving arcs of holy light through the darkness. You can't run forever, monster, he calls out. I've killed 17 of your kind, and you won't be any different. I don't want to hurt you, Damien replies from the shadows above, his voice echoing strangely in the vaulted space. Leave now, and no one else needs to die. The only death here will be yours, but Elena has discoveries of her own to make. As she crouches behind the altar, her grandmother's black pearl rosary grows warm against her skin, beginning to emit the same soft luminescence that fills the monastery whenever she and Damien are together. The blessed beads don't burn her fingers as they should. Instead, they pulse with protective energy that seems to repel the hunter's consecrated weapons. A crossbow bolt, meant for her heart, strikes the rosary and disintegrates harmlessly, the silver tip crumbling to dust before it can pierce her flesh. Elena stares at the artifact in amazement, understanding finally dawning. Her grandmother's journal contains more than botanical observations. Hidden between pressed flower specimens are pages of cramped handwriting in multiple languages, prayers and protective wards, genealogical charts that trace Elena's family line back through centuries, of women who served as guardians for supernatural. Beings deemed worthy of protection. Elena isn't just a botanist who happened to find Damien's sanctuary. She's the latest in a bloodline specifically chosen to recognize and shield creatures who use their supernatural abilities for healing rather than harm. The rosary responds to her newfound understanding, its protective aura expanding outward to encompass the entire monastery. Cain's blessed weapons suddenly feel heavy in his hands, their holy power neutralized by something older and more fundamental than ecclesiastical authority. What's happening? One of his hunters calls out as his silver ammunition fails to fire. She's protecting the vampire, Cain realizes with growing horror. The woman isn't a victim, she's a collaborator. Elena emerges from behind the altar, the rosary blazing with protective light that makes her look like an avenging angel. I'm protecting someone I love from people who refuse to see past their own prejudices, she corrects. Damien isn't the monster here. Kane's worldview, built on decades of absolute certainty about the nature of good and evil, begins to crack. He's dedicated his life to a war between darkness and light. But Elena's obvious sanctity while defending a vampire challenges everything he believes about supernatural morality. Vampires are damned creatures, he insists. They feed on human life, corrupt everything they touch. One tends gardens and preserves knowledge, Elena counters. He's spent 3 centuries learning to take only what's freely given, to use his abilities to protect rather than prey upon the innocent. Damien appears beside Elena with fluid grace, his supernatural speed no longer hidden but openly displayed. The hunters raise their weapons instinctively, but the blessed silver continues to fail in the rosary's protective field. "I was made vampire against my will," Damien says quietly, addressing Kane directly. "Transformed in grief and desperation, then left to choose what kind of creature to become. I chose to honor the family I lost by protecting life rather than destroying it." Kane stares at the pair, seeing something that shouldn't exist according to his understanding of supernatural law. A vampire and human standing together in holy light, protected by sacred artifacts that should destroy the undead on contact. "You're an abomination," he whispers, but his voice lacks its earlier conviction. "I'm a choice," Damien replies. "The same choice every conscious being faces. Whether to use power to create or destroy, to nurture or consume, to love or fear." The monastery bells begin to ring, their bronze voices carrying across the valley with supernatural clarity. 13 chimes, just as they rang the day Damien arrived and again when Elena first touched the bell rope. But this time, they're joined by other bells, dozens of them, echoing from churches and monasteries across the region as if answering a call to witness something momentous. Elena's hands shake as she opens her grandmother's final letter, the one she was instructed to read only when the guardian needs your protection. The envelope has remained sealed in the back of Marguerite's journal for 3 years, but the events of tonight make its timing feel divinely orchestrated. The letter is brief but transformative. "My dearest Elena, if you are reading this, then you have found him at last. Our family has served as guardians for 5 centuries, protecting those supernatural beings who choose light over darkness. The rosary you wear belonged to your great-great-grandmother, who sheltered a werewolf family during the Salem trials. The crystals I taught you to use channel power passed down through generations of women who understood that monsters are made by choices, not birth. You are the last of our line, child. When I die, the responsibility passes to you. Trust your heart over your fears, and remember that sometimes the greatest act of faith is defending what others condemn." Elena looks up to find Kane's hunters retreating, their weapons useless against the protective field surrounding the monastery. But Kane himself remains, his silver blade lowered but not sheathed. "Your grandmother was a guardian," he says, understanding dawning in his voice. "I've heard whispers of such bloodlines, but I thought they were myths. My family has protected supernatural beings for 500 years, Elena confirms, the weight of ancestral responsibility settling on her shoulders like a mantle. "We learn to distinguish between creatures who prey and those who protect, between monsters by nature and monsters by choice." She pulls out her grandmother's grimoire, its leather binding worn smooth by generations of handling. The pages contain far more than pressed flowers. They hold centuries of accumulated wisdom about supernatural healing, protection spells, and, most importantly, the ritual that might allow Damien to reclaim more of his lost humanity. "There's a ceremony," Elena explains, turning to a page marked with a ribbon bookmark, "a way to partially reverse vampiric transformation for those who've proven their commitment to redemption." Damien stares at the open book with something approaching terror. "Elena, such rituals are dangerous. If they fail, they could destroy both of us. And if we don't try, you'll spend eternity caught between human and monster, never fully either. Elena traces the ritual instructions with one finger, noting the complexity of the spell components. The choice is yours, but I'm offering to share the risk. Cain steps closer, his professional curiosity overriding his religious conditioning. What kind of ritual? Elena reads aloud from her grandmother's careful script. The ceremony of duel. Arts requires the vampire to surrender their immortality temporarily, while their human partner offers part of their life force to restore the vampire's capacity for full emotional connection. If successful, the vampire retains their supernatural abilities but regains their human soul. And if it fails, both participants die, Damien says quietly. The vampire's immortality is severed permanently, while their partner's life force is consumed in the attempt. Cain lowers his blade completely, his hunter's instincts warring against growing evidence that everything he believed about vampire nature might be wrong. Why would you risk that? Eleanor looks at Damien with eyes that hold 3 weeks of shared memories, of quiet conversations and growing trust, of love discovered in the most unlikely circumstances. Because some things are worth risking everything for. The ceremony requires 7 blessed candles arranged in a star pattern, each representing an aspect of humanity that vampirism supposedly destroys: love, compassion, hope, faith, courage, wisdom, and redemption. Elena retrieves candles from the monastery's supply, made from beeswax, harvested by monks 2 centuries ago, but somehow still pure and unburned. The ritual must be performed at the moment between night and day, Elena continues reading, when darkness and light exist in perfect balance. The participants must be willing to sacrifice everything for each other, their bond tested by the possibility of mutual destruction. Dawn is still 2 hours away, giving them time to prepare, but not to reconsider. Cain's remaining hunters have withdrawn to a safe distance, uncertain whether they're witnessing a demonic ritual or something approaching divine intervention. I've spent 27 years hunting creatures like you, Cain tells Damien, but I've never seen a vampire protected by consecrated objects, never encountered one who chose preservation over predation. Then perhaps, Damien replies, you've been hunting the wrong monsters. Elena begins gathering the ritual components, her movements sure despite the trembling in her hands. The grimoire's pages seem to glow in the candlelight, as if responding to her intent to use knowledge passed down through generations of women, who understood that love sometimes requires the ultimate leap of faith. The 7 candles burn with flames that shouldn't exist, each one blazing with a different color that corresponds to the aspect of humanity it represents. Elena and Damien kneel within the circle they've created in the monastery's central courtyard, surrounded by the garden that has become their shared testament to the possibility of beauty growing from darkness. The grimoire lies open between them, its ancient pages glowing with script that seems to write itself as Elena speaks the words of invocation. The ritual requires absolute honesty between participants, the stripping away of every barrier and defense that keeps souls separate. I offer my life force to restore what was lost, Elena begins, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she's attempting. Not from pity or obligation, but from love that sees past surface to substance, past curse to choice. Damien's response comes from 3 centuries of accumulated longing. I accept this gift not as theft, but as trust, promising to honor the humanity you helped me reclaim by using whatever abilities remain to protect rather than prey upon the innocent. The candles flare brighter, their supernatural flames beginning to merge into a single column of multicolored light that rises toward the star-filled sky. Elena feels her life force beginning to flow outward, not draining away, but expanding, to encompass both herself and Damien in a connection deeper than their earlier blood-sharing ritual. But the ceremony demands more than pretty words and good intentions. It requires both participants to confront their deepest fears, to face the possibility that love might not be enough to bridge the gap between human and monster. Elena experiences Damien's darkest memories, the first kill after his transformation, when hunger overcame humanity and he drained a young woman who reminded him of his lost daughter. Decades of self-loathing that followed when he nearly walked into sunrise to end his cursed existence. The slow, painful process of learning to control his nature while believing he was fundamentally damned. Damien, in turn, sees Elena's hidden wounds, the survivor's guilt that has haunted her since her parents' death, her fear that everyone she loves will abandon her as death abandoned them, her desperate need to heal others as a way of proving she deserves the life her parents were denied. The ritual strips away their defenses, leaving them naked before each other in ways that have nothing to do with flesh. Cain watches from beyond the circle, his hunter's instincts recognizing something unprecedented in his experience with supernatural phenomena. The vampire isn't taking from her, he realizes aloud. They're sharing, combining their essences rather than one consuming the other. The seventh candle, representing redemption, suddenly blazes so bright it turns night to day within the monastery grounds. Elena feels something fundamental shift in Damien's nature, like ice breaking up after the longest winter. His supernatural coldness gives way to human warmth, his predatory stillness replaced by the small, unconscious movements of breathing heartbeat, life truly lived rather than merely sustained. But the ritual exacts its price. Elena's life force flows into Damien not as sacrifice, but as gift, restoring his capacity for full emotional connection at the cost of her own mortality. She ages years in moments, her dark hair showing silver threads, her smooth skin gaining the lines that mark a life fully experienced. Elena, stop! Damien tries to break the connection, but she holds firm. This is my choice, she gasps, feeling decades of potential life flowing between them. I'd rather have a few years of real love than a lifetime of safe solitude. The transformation reaches its climax as dawn breaks over the eastern mountains. Damien feels his heart beating for the first time in 3 centuries, feels breath-filled lungs that remember their original purpose. He's still supernatural, still faster and stronger than mortals, but the crushing weight of immortal isolation has lifted. Elena collapses as the last candle burns out, aged but not destroyed, weakened but not broken. Damien catches her as she falls, and for the first time since his transformation, tears of joy rather than grief fall from his eyes. "Did it work?" she whispers. Damien helps her to her feet, both of them swaying with exhaustion, but alive in ways they've never been before. The sunrise doesn't burn him as it once would have, though he still needs to shield his eyes from direct light. He's caught between human and vampire now, possessing the best aspects of both natures. "Look," Elena says, pointing toward the memorial garden she planted for his mortal family. The forget-me-nots have bloomed overnight in impossible profusion, their tiny blue faces turned toward the dawn like prayers made visible. At their center, the rose-cutting has not only survived but flourished, producing a single perfect bloom of deep red that carries the fragrance of love that transcends death itself. Catherine's ring has lived against Damien's heart for 3 centuries, a golden band that once symbolized promises he thought death had broken forever. He pulls it from the chain around his neck as Elena sleeps, recovering from the ritual that has changed them both in ways they're still discovering. The engagement ring catches candlelight with the warm glow of old gold, its simple design speaking to a time when love was declared with craftsmanship rather than carrots. Damien remembers sliding it onto Catherine's finger in his father's vineyard, remembers her laugh as she admired how the metal matched the autumn leaves surrounding them. But holding it now, he feels no pain, only a gentle melancholy that honors what was without demanding it, define what could be. The ritual has freed him from the prison of perpetual mourning, allowing him to love Catherine's memory without being enslaved by it. Elena stirs beside him, her hair now shot through with premature silver that makes her look like a wise woman, touched by moonlight. The aging the ritual caused isn't purely physical. She carries herself with new gravity, as if the experience of sharing life force with an immortal has granted her perspective that usually comes only with decades of living. "I dreamed about her," Eleanor says softly, not needing to specify who she means. "Catherine. She was standing in a garden that looked like ours, but filled with flowers that don't exist in this world." Damien's breath catches. "What did she say?" "She told me to take care of you." Elena sits up slowly, studying the ring in Damien's palm. "She said she'd been waiting 3 centuries for someone worthy to love you, someone who could see past what you'd become to who you chose to be." The words pierce Damien's heart with their impossible comfort. For 300 years, he's carried guilt for surviving when his family died, for finding love again when Catherine never could. But Elena's dream offers something he never dared hope for, his lost love's blessing on the new life he's building. "She also said something else," Elena continues. "She said the ring belongs to the living now, not the dead." Damien looks at the golden band with new eyes, seeing not a monument to loss, but a bridge between past and future. Catherine's love shaped him into someone capable of deep devotion. Elena's love is healing the wounds that devotion created when it had nowhere to flow. "I need to let her go," he realizes. "Not forget her, not dishonor what we had, but release her to whatever peace awaits while I embrace what's possible in this world." Elena takes his hand, her touch warm and steady and utterly present. "Love doesn't diminish by being shared, Damien. Loving me doesn't betray Catherine any more than loving Catherine prevented you from loving me." The heart expands to hold what it values. They walk together to the memorial garden Elena planted, where forget-me-nots bloom in impossible abundance around the rose that represents Damien's mortal family. This place was meant to honor the dead, but in the morning light it feels more like a celebration of continuity, of love that transforms rather than ends. Damien kneels among the flowers and begins digging with his bare hands, creating a small grave for the ring that has anchored him to the past. Elena doesn't try to stop him or offer easy words of comfort. She simply witnesses this act of letting go, understanding that some transformations require ritual to become real. "I'll always love you, Catherine," Damien whispers as he places the ring in the earth. "Thank you for teaching me that my heart was worth saving, even when I couldn't save yours." He covers the ring with soil and stands, brushing dirt from his hands with gestures that feel like benediction. The memorial garden no longer looks like a shrine to loss. It's become a foundation for future growth, a place where old love can nourish new without competing or conflicting. Elena takes his face in her hands, studying the changes the ritual has wrought. His supernatural beauty remains, but it's softened by humanity regained, by the capacity for joy that comes from choosing love over fear. "I have something for you," she says, pulling a small box from her jacket pocket. Inside rests a silver locket, modern and simple with space for 2 photographs. Elena has already placed their pictures inside, taken by Kane's camera before the hunters departed. Images that capture them not as monster and victim, but as partners in an impossible love that has somehow found a way to flourish. "For new beginnings," she says, fastening the chain around his neck. Damien feels the locket's weight against his chest, warm where Catherine's ring was always cold. This is love as choice rather than memory, as daily decision rather than historical fact. He looks at Elena and sees not Catherine's replacement, but someone entirely new, someone worth becoming human for. Kane's final assault comes at sunset. When shadows grow long, and his remaining tactical advantages converge into one last desperate gamble. He's called in favors from hunters across New England, assembling a strike team of 12 men armed with every blessed weapon the underground monster hunting community can provide. They breach the monastery grounds with military precision, moving through Elena's garden like invading angels, determined to purge what they cannot understand. Cain leads from the front, his consecrated silver blade reflecting the dying light as he advances toward the bell tower where Damien has made his stand. "This ends tonight," Cain calls out, his voice echoing across the courtyard. "Whatever spell that woman cast to protect you, it won't stop righteous steel backed by divine purpose." But Cain underestimates the fundamental change the ritual has wrought. Damien no longer fights as a monster defending his lair. He moves with the desperate courage of a man protecting his home, and the woman who chose to share it with him, the bell tower, becomes a fortress as Damien uses its consecrated bronze bells to create barriers of holy sound that disrupt the hunter's blessed ammunition. Each chime sends shockwaves through silver bullets, causing them to fragment harmlessly in the air. The irony isn't lost on him. The same religious artifacts that should destroy him now serve as his weapons. Elena coordinates their defense from the monastery's central chapel, using her grandmother's protective spells to shield the building's entrances, while Damien engages Cain's forces in the courtyard. Her aging hands move with surprising dexterity as she arranges crystals and candles in patterns that create sanctuary within sanctuary. "You're protecting a demon," one of Cain's hunters shouts as his crossbow bolts turn to ash before reaching their target. "I'm protecting the man I love," Elena replies, her voice carrying across the battleground with supernatural clarity. Damien chose redemption over damnation, healing over hunting. If you can't see the difference, then you're the one consumed by darkness. The battle rages through the monastery's sacred spaces, hunters and defenders weaving between columns that have stood for centuries, their conflict playing out among flowers that bloom in defiance of natural law. Cain pursues Damien up the winding stairs to the bell tower's peak, where medieval bronze and modern steel meet in combat that will determine not just their fates, but the nature of justice itself. "You killed my sister," Cain pants, his blade seeking Damien's heart with methodical precision. "Drained her blood and left her body in an alley like garbage." Damien parries desperately, his enhanced reflexes barely keeping pace with Cain's skill. "I never harmed your sister. I haven't killed a human being in over 2 centuries. All vampires are the same. All of you feed on innocence and call it nature." But as they fight, Cain begins to notice things that don't match his expectations. Damien doesn't fight to kill. He disarms rather than destroys, deflects rather than attacks. Even in mortal combat, the vampire holds back, seeking to end the conflict without claiming Cain's life. The revelation comes as dawn breaks over the mountains, sending the first rays of sunlight streaming through the bell tower's windows. Cain expects the light to destroy his enemy, but Damien merely shields his eyes and continues fighting. The vampire's transformation, his partial return to humanity, has granted him tolerance for the dawn he once feared. "You're not the monster that killed Sarah," Cain realizes, his blade faltering mid-strike. "That creature was young, savage, feeding without control. You're something else entirely." Damien seizes the moment of doubt, disarming Cain with a move that could have been fatal, but leaves the hunter merely weaponless. "I was that monster once," he admits. "For 50 years after my transformation, I was everything you believe vampires to be. But I chose to change, to become something better than my nature demanded." Cain stares at his empty hands, then at the vampire who spared his life when killing would have been easier. Around them, the bronze bells ring with their own voice, 13 chimes that speak of transformation and redemption, of love that conquers even the darkness of the grave. "My sister," Cain whispers. "She was 23, art student, had her whole life ahead of her." "I'm sorry," Damien says, and Cain hears genuine grief in the vampire's voice. I'm sorry for your loss, sorry for what my kind has done to yours. Sorry that justice and vengeance have become so tangled in your heart that you can't see past hatred to hope. The sunrise that should have been Damien's funeral pyre becomes instead his baptism into a new existence. The light streaming through the monastery's ancient windows touches his skin without burning, warming flesh that has known only supernatural cold for 3 centuries. Elena finds him standing in the garden's center, arms outstretched toward the dawn, tears of wonder flowing down his face. "I can feel it," he whispers as she approaches. "The warmth, the life in the light. I'd forgotten how beautiful morning could be." Elena surveys the damage from Cain's assault with mixed emotions. Several of her grandmother's rare plantings were trampled in the battle, their delicate stems broken by booted feet that couldn't distinguish between miracle and mundane vegetation. But the garden's heart remains intact, the moonflowers and ghost orchids continuing their impossible bloom as if violence were merely a passing storm. Cain's hunters have withdrawn, carrying their wounded leader to whatever sanctuary monster hunters seek when their certainties crumble. The vampire hunter himself lies unconscious in the monastery's infirmary, tended by Elena's healing arts despite his attempts to destroy everything she values. Damien suggested they simply let him die, but Elena's nature won't permit such abandonment. He lost his sister, she explains as she changes Cain's bandages. Grief turned him into what he hunted, consumed him, until he couldn't see past his own pain to recognize genuine redemption. Damien touches the silver locket at his throat, feeling Catherine's memory settling into peace rather than torment. Grief can be a poison or a teacher. I chose poison for 3 centuries before you showed me another path. The monastery bears scars from the battle, but they're healing scars rather than fatal wounds. Stained glass windows will need replacement, bullet holes in ancient stones require careful repair, and the herb garden needs complete replanting. But the structure stands, the library intact, the garden's essential beauty unbroken. Elena moves through their sanctuary with new understanding of her role as guardian. The ritual didn't just transform Damien's nature. It awakened her full inheritance as protector of supernatural beings who choose light over darkness. Her grandmother's journals contain names and locations of others like Damien, creatures caught between monster and savior who need allies rather than enemies. "We can't stay here," she realizes as they survey their damaged haven. "Cain will recover, and he'll bring others. This place is too exposed, too well known now to serve as sanctuary." Damien nods reluctantly, understanding the practical necessity while mourning the loss of his 3-century home. "Where will we go?" Elena pulls out a map, annotated in her grandmother's careful handwriting, marked with symbols that indicate safe houses and allies scattered across North America. The network of guardians runs deeper than she imagined, a hidden community dedicated to proving that redemption remains possible even for the supposedly damned. "Colorado," she says, pointing to a remote mountain location. "There's a group there, humans and supernatural beings working together to create something new. A place where creatures like you can find community with others, trying to choose healing over hunting." They spend the day gathering essentials. Damien's most precious books, seeds from Elena's garden, artifacts that carry too much meaning to abandon. The rest they leave for whatever future the monastery might hold, trusting that the sacred ground will preserve their work until other guardians arrive to continue it. Cain awakens as sunset approaches, his hunter's instincts immediately assessing his surroundings for threats and opportunities. He finds Elena sitting beside his bed, reading from one of Damien's botanical texts while moonflowers outside the window begin their nightly display. "Why didn't you kill me?" he asks, his voice hoarse from battle and revelation. "Because killing you would make us no different from the monsters you hunt," Elena replies. "Besides, you might be useful once you understand what we're really fighting against, which is the assumption that nature determines destiny, that what you're born as matters more than what you choose to become. Eleanor closes the book and looks at Kane with compassion rather than judgment. Your sister's killer is still out there, still feeding, still destroying innocent lives. Damien isn't your enemy, Marcus. He's proof that even the damned can find salvation. Kane struggles to sit up, his worldview shifting like tectonic plates rearranging themselves. How do I tell the difference? How do I know which ones deserve redemption and which ones deserve death? The same way you know the difference between any person who chooses good or evil, Elena says simply. You watch their actions, not their nature. You judge their choices, not their origins. The first ray of sunrise illuminates Elena's face as she speaks, making her look like wisdom personified. The mountain cabin sits like a jewel among Colorado pines, solar panels catching autumn sunlight, while a greenhouse glows with supernatural luminescence behind walls of glass and dreams. Elena and Damien have spent 6 months transforming the abandoned research station into something unprecedented. A home where human and vampire coexist, not in spite of their differences, but because of them. Elena's botanical work has flourished in ways the University of Vermont never could have imagined. Her hybrid moonflowers, descended from seeds planted at the monastery, have adapted to mountain conditions with remarkable resilience. They climb the cabin's walls in cascades of silver-white blooms that open continuously, day and night. Their bioluminescent petals providing natural lighting that reduces Damien's dependence on artificial illumination. The greenhouse has become a laboratory where impossible things grow with scientific precision. Elena documents each hybrid she develops, each successful crossing between mundane plants and their supernatural variants. Her research notes read like poetry wrapped in botanical terminology, describing how intention influences growth patterns, how emotional states affect flowering cycles, how love literally changes the chemistry of soil and seed. Damien has found his calling as more than Elena's partner. He's become teacher and mentor to a growing community of supernatural beings seeking alternatives to traditional predator-prey relationships. The cabin's location serves as a way station for creatures traveling between established sanctuaries, a place where vampires can learn to feed without killing, where shapeshifters can control their transformations, where beings touched by otherworldly forces can discover they're not condemned to isolation. Their first permanent resident arrives in October, a young werewolf named Sarah, who was bitten at 16 and abandoned by her pack when she couldn't control her transformations. Elena teaches her to use meditation and herbal preparations to manage the change, while Damien shares techniques for maintaining humanity even when supernatural nature demands surrender to instinct. The key, Damien explains as Sarah struggles with her monthly transformation, is understanding that you're not fighting your nature. You're choosing which aspects to embrace. You can be wolf without being savage, powerful without being destructive. Elena creates a lunar garden specifically for Sarah's needs, blunting it with flowers that respond to moon phases and provide natural aromatherapy during difficult transitions. The combination of scientific methodology and inherited wisdom produces results that amaze even Elena. Sarah's transformations become controlled events rather than chaotic surrenders, times of strength rather than loss of self. Word spreads through supernatural networks that existence operates primarily through whispered rumors and coded messages. The mountain sanctuary becomes known as a place where redemption is possible, where creatures can learn to integrate their dual natures rather than being consumed by them. Not all who arrive are ready for the discipline such integration requires, but those who commit to the work find community they never imagined possible. Elena's aging, accelerated by the ritual that partially restored Damien's humanity, has stabilized at what appears to be her mid-40s. The silver threads in her hair catch sunlight like spun starlight, and the lines around her eyes speak to laughter shared and wisdom earned. She moves with the confidence of someone who has found her true calling, no longer the uncertain botanist following her grandmother's cryptic clues, but a woman fully embracing her role as guardian and healer. Damien's transformation continues to evolve. He can tolerate increasing amounts of sunlight, though direct exposure still causes discomfort. His need for blood has diminished to monthly feedings that Elena provides willingly, their blood-sharing rituals having become sacraments of connection rather than predatory necessity. He ages slowly but perceptibly, his immortal nature modified by love into something approaching extended human lifespan. The moonflower seeds Elena planted at the monastery have taken root in the mountain soil with impossible enthusiasm. Each plant carries genetic memory of its origins, blooming in patterns that seem to spell out messages of hope for those who understand the language of growing things. The garden becomes their shared vocabulary, a way of communicating truths too deep for words. On clear nights, when the mountain air carries sounds for miles, they sometimes hear the distant bells of the abandoned monastery echoing across valleys and time. Elena has learned that Cain arranged for the building's preservation as a historical site, his understanding transformed by watching love triumph over the hatred that had consumed him. Their mailbox, installed at the foot of the mountain road, bears only initials and a post office box number. But letters arrive regularly from creatures seeking sanctuary, from humans discovering supernatural connections in their families, from guardians around the world sharing knowledge and offering alliance. Elena and Damien have become the founders of something unprecedented. A community where impossible love proves that redemption is always within reach for those brave enough to choose it. 1 year after their first meeting in the moonlit forest, Elena and Damien stand in their mountain garden, surrounded by impossible beauty. The moonflowers have evolved beyond even Elena's grandmother's most optimistic projections, their hybrid vigor creating cascades of luminescent blooms that transform night into something approaching daylight without the harsh brightness that still troubles Damien's vampire-sensitive eyes. The silver locket at Damien's throat catches the flower light as he turns to watch Elena harvest seeds from plants that represent the full circle of their journey together. Each variety tells part of their story. Forget-me-nots that remember without mourning, roses that honor the past while embracing the future, ghost orchids that prove beauty can thrive in conditions science declares impossible. Do you ever regret it? Elena asks, her voice carrying the contentment of someone who has found her life's work. Choosing uncertainty over immortal solitude? Damien considers the question seriously, as he's learned to consider all aspects of their transformed existence. His reflection shows in the greenhouse windows, still beautiful in the otherworldly way of his kind, but softened by humanity regained, marked by the capacity for joy that love has restored to his features. I regret the centuries I wasted believing redemption was impossible, he says finally. But I can't regret the path that led me to you, even though it began in darkness. Their sanctuary has become more than a home. It's evolved into a research station that bridges supernatural and scientific communities in ways neither world imagined possible. Elena's published papers, carefully edited to remove the most fantastical elements, have revolutionized botanical understanding of plant consciousness and environmental responsiveness. Her greenhouse techniques are being replicated in university programs across North America. Though none of those institutions realize their innovations originated from studying flowers that bloom. With their own light, the network of guardians has expanded beyond Elena's grandmother's most ambitious dreams. Letters arrive monthly from humans who've discovered supernatural connections in their family histories, from creatures seeking alternatives to predatory existence, from researchers documenting impossible phenomena with the patience science demands and the faith miracles require. Cain visits on the anniversary of their first battle, no longer the driven hunter who nearly destroyed their sanctuary, but a man transformed by witnessing redemption in action. He's become their liaison to law enforcement communities, helping identify genuine threats while protecting creatures who've chosen integration over isolation. The Montreal Pack wants to establish a sister sanctuary in the Laurentians, he reports, settling into the porch chair they've designated as his during visits. 3 werewolf families, all committed to controlled transformation and community integration. Elena looks up from her seed catalogue, noting how Kane's face has lost the haunted intensity that once defined him. Finding purpose beyond vengeance has aged him in reverse, revealing the idealistic young man who once believed he could protect the innocent by destroying the dangerous. They'll need someone with botanical experience, Elena observes. Plants that respond to lunar cycles, aromatherapy gardens for transformation management. I know someone who might be interested, Damien says, nodding towards Sarah's greenhouse, where their first resident tends seedlings that will eventually become someone else's sanctuary garden. She's ready for independence, ready to teach what she's learned here. The sun sets behind mountain peaks that frame their chosen home like cathedral walls. Painting the sky in colors Elena's flowers seem to echo and enhance. She moves through her garden with the unconscious grace of someone who has found perfect alignment between passion and purpose, documenting the day's growth while planning tomorrow's experiments. Damien lights the evening candles with matches rather than supernatural power, a small ritual that connects him to his humanity while honoring the otherworldly gifts that make their work possible. The flames catch the locket's silver surface, reflecting their joined image in miniature, 2 souls who found each other in darkness and chose to create light. I kept my part of our bargain, Elena says, settling beside him on the bench they built from monastery stones carried across half a continent. Healed your leg injury the night we met, then spent the year healing your heart. And I kept mine, Damien replies, taking her hand with the reverence of someone who remembers centuries of solitude. Healed your physical wounds, then discovered that healing your heart healed my own. Above them, the first stars emerge in a sky clear enough to see forever. Their garden glows with gentle luminescence, a beacon of hope in a world that too often forgets redemption remains possible, even for those who consider themselves beyond salvation. They've proven that love can indeed bloom in darkness, that healing can bridge any gap, that 2 broken souls can create something beautiful enough to light the way for others still searching for home.